It doesn't matter if you claim to be the nephew of one of your mother's brothers who had guarded the President of the United States for over 3 decades. That doesn't make a difference between us who work for the state and who can constantly make a business and your the way you live your life. And yes, we still have ultimate control over you, who has a direct connection with the feds and someone who worked for the feds, who is currently being watched probably by the feds. And we're the state who is underneath the federal government. The federal laws are the ones that have to pass the state laws. They provide the privilege to those who work in the state legal system of whether or not a state law passes. Let's say, like, like the legal status of salvia divinorum being legal in certain states and certain jurisdictions. Noise ordinance issues are not as much of a problem, depending on, you know, if it's closer to an urban location, that there's more of a um, leverage to the noise factor of certain communities and things like that, where they have let's say there's a higher crime rate of, let's say, something more serious that goes on there. Obviously, where I live, it's quite quiet all the time, you know what I mean? So they tried okay, anyways. But yeah, it doesn't matter, because I was planning on eventually maybe the whole purpose of my study of software development and my skill sets was to eventually design the softwares, to be flexible enough, to be extensible enough later on, to add other features possibly. It took me 23 years of studying computer science to understand how to design it from the ground up, but I did use a few libraries. Yet, as with most people who know jQuery, Ajax or asynchronous JavaScript and XML, PHP, MySQL, JavaScript, uh, dynamic, a little bit of dynamic HTML, like the get document by ID and things like that. I used a little bit of that here and there while designing it, while I was creating the first version, and then I substituted that with the jQuery, I believe. jQuery selectors to select the various HTML5 elements within the HTML5 document. Okay, anyways, those who are experienced web app developers who use jQuery, JavaScript, HTML5 are familiar with what I'm talking about when it comes to jQuery selectors. Instead of if they started programming before jQuery was designed in 2006, uh, what was before then, from 1995 up until 2006, there was various forms of dynamic HTML, and where JavaScript used a selector similar to like jQuery selectors, both get element by ID or get element by whatever, I forget what it was, object or something like that. Document dot get element by whatever. Anyways, so the way I was designing Frugal, for instance, and from what a professional software developer learns, one of the main things that they have to focus on is their aim and goal of, let's say, a product that they want to last for many years later, is to design it so that it could eventually be easily updatable and extensible. They they design it in its infancy to eventually be where new features could be added to it without too much um, of a need of documenting the code too much. You know, it were the, let's say an experienced programmer who, let's say, if I ever wanted to, like, I'm not going to want to sell Frugal to anyone. I'm going to want to keep it. But you know, some people, they want to sell their products. Let's say Google wanted to sell their search engine collection of, let's say, like Google Documents, Google Photos, Google. It's just an example. Or okay, let's say I don't want to sell Frugal. Okay, I don't even want to fathom, you know, handing it over to anyone else. But they always have access to, let's say, you know, Heroku, the web server that hosts my web app Frugal that I designed, is able to detect, let's say, you the post and request URL submissions and things like that. It's able to detect whenever, let's say, a PHP post is happening through my web app, and or a request, and then it can capture the IP address of whoever's doing that, like the click on the demand buttons, for instance. It gets automatically um, logged on the Heroku logs, and Heroku has the ability of eventually, if they ever wanted to, they could do their own statistic chart. I don't even have to do the HTML5 canvas animated charts and graphs thing. Someone else could easily, you know, get that through the Heroku logs based on the clicks and parsing. Basically, they would be able to determine what type of request it was by clicking the demand button. For instance, they would see that the name of the button being clicked would be, I think, demand up or demand down or something like that. That I had labeled it as for when it does a post or request through the PHP script, and they would be able to identify it in plain text and see that, and then be able to parse whenever it detects, let's say, the demand up, that they would have on their end a HTML5 graph or chart, or it could be even written in C programming language, or it could be some other type of, it could even be ActionScript 2.0, you know, on their end, or someone that they would allow access to those Heroku logs maybe, and then they would be able to see, let's say, the demands on there, you know, that people would be clicking demand up, demand down, based off of the unique IP address of the computer system that those demands are coming from, in order to see whether or not to increment upward one by one pixel or not, depending on the unique IP address, and if whether or not it's demand up or demand down on a certain product. All right, so that's what I'm trying to say. That's where it's like, I already know that's available. I can always add that later on, possibly. You know, HTML5 graph or chart using HTML5 canvas. I could easily do that on my own. I already know how to do that. I already know, like, what was that? Draw a rectangle. It's either draw dot rec. I just have to look it up and then type in the correct parameters, and you know, use a variable for the x and y or something like that, x and y axis of, and then, you know, we would get the current values for certain, like, certain bars on the bar graph, and then it would If it was a demand up, it would go up 1 pixel. But it would do. I would be able to parse the IP address to myself. I already have it logging IPs and stuff like that. But I don't know why they see American Registry of Internet Numbers. They mask or block even me, who would, let's say if I was able to get an IP address, I would not be able to trace it beyond, let's say, Heroku's, or I would not be able to find the geolocation. I didn't program uh, Frugal to detect geolocations or anything like that. They would see that. They'd see I didn't add that feature. So yeah, American Registry of Internet Numbers, those who work there may be able, usually it's like the federal government has access to that, the actual locations of, yeah, they would have to go to the ISP, the internet service provider, of where those IP addresses would be coming from. And then they would, um, people who work at those ISPs would possibly be able to see in their database where that person actually lives who clicked on that demand button, for instance. But otherwise, there's no other, like, on a certain product or something like that would be posted. So I have people in their house, they have no access through that unless they work for, let's say, an ISP, or if they work for, let's say, American Registry of Internet Numbers, but they usually only have the ISP of where those IPs would be for certain websites that are being hosted. They would know the ISP, but then they would have, like, if they had to really investigate something somewhere, they would have, let's say, the law enforcement, go to the ISP and then see whatever. It's usually the way things are. But anyways, I everyday people don't. Even a software developer doesn't have. They they may be able to see the ISP on the ISP of that IP address if they did a search, like a whois search on American Registry of Internet Numbers or something like that. But they would have to go there, or they would have to go to the ISP, and then they would, obviously, if they're not working there, or if, like, they'd be screened ahead of time in order to work there, obviously. And then just, like, I'm not even sure how much information they do know the house addresses at the ISPs. Internet service providers being, like,